Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Christopher. Oh Brother, Absence, Audiotree Live. So that's what we're going to be checking out today. I've enjoyed Oh Brother in the past. Let's dive in and see what they're doing with Absence. Very shrill sounds. Also getting a lot of emphasis out of that snare by playing with the back of the drumstick, rather than using the tip of it. Yeah, I mean, we're a couple of minutes in now. This is obviously going to be a super moody track. Who's doing the harmonies? Vocal harmonies. Another one? Nope. Gonna stick with the single fake out. They've teased a higher energy sound twice now. I'm real curious when we're gonna get to that. Yeah, I was gonna say, some sort of slide going on there. I forget what that device is called though. That metal tube you put on your finger to get that very smooth movement. There we go. Lots of compression on that clean vocal. We have 2 sets of tremolo on here. They have a pedal called the Demon King. I wonder what particular effect that puts on their guitar. Alright, so there's both a lot going on here and not a lot going on here, and I find that to be really interesting. The atmosphere does shift quite a bit. The beginning of the song is not really anything like the end of the song if you're going completely on feeling and general sound, sonic properties, but when you look at the composition, really not a lot change going on. The riff at the beginning, well, not really a riff, the chord progression at the beginning is pretty much the chord progression at the end. There's a lot of production stuff both in guitar tone, crafting of tone, whether that's pre-crafting, where we have sort of the lighter like clean electric stuff versus the heavy compressed distorted stuff at the end, or live alteration of the guitar tone, like the person who was playing with their pedal board the entire time. Lots of production stuff going on in here that crafts a completely different sound as we transfer and move through the different moments of this track. But like I said, what's on paper, the notes that are being played, the chord progression, that doesn't really change much at all across this song. And so this is one of those cases where I'd say they get a lot of mileage out of a single idea. and it really is about modifying pretty much everything except the composition in order to create a very effective slow burn across this track. And so I do want to talk about the composition real quick here. We have, for the most part, in a majority of this song, either a 4-chord progression or an 8-chord progression. Both of these are pretty much the same. The 4-chord moves in a cyclical pattern where the final chord dips down and it sort of pushes back into that home chord that they start the progression on. With the 8-chord progression, we have the same first 3, but the 4th one goes up. Then we start the same first 3 again, and we go down just like on the 4-chord version of it. So honestly, while we are looking at 8 chords in succession, we're only looking at 5 unique chords. And pretty much a majority of it, 6 of the 8 bars, are very identical. The 1, 2, and 3 on both repetitions is the same. There might be some minor variations to that. Maybe, one particular section that altered it a little bit. Maybe I didn't pick up on it. But when I think back to the opening quieter section, when I looked at the first heavy section around like minute 4.5, and when I looked at the final bits of the heavy section around, what was that, like minute 7, 7.5, 8, somewhere around there. Yeah, there is just a lot of consistency in the chord progression, and that actually makes a lot of sense. This is a song that focuses on one atmosphere, one primary emotion and feeling. The thing with emotion in music is that it's usually about not necessarily a specific set of chords in a row, but a specific altering of intervals through the chord progression. So it's more about chord names. Ah, dang, that gets a little bit too deep into theory, I think, for this. I try to find like a midpoint between like totally just using layman's terms and then being, actual music theory. I try to make it accessible to the most amount of people. Just know that different chords have different properties based on what your home chord is. And it's more about the relationships between the chord and your home chord, your root chord, in the key that you're in. And those relationships are what's more important than anything else. So keeping these relationships identical across this chord progression, it doesn't matter what chord you start on, as long as each chord is the same relationship to the one prior to it. And so, like I mentioned, somewhere in the middle of the song, we might actually change chords, like the specific chords, but I think the relationship between the chords all stays the same because the emotional weight of this track never really shifts at all. A lot of it is hyper focused on this dismal, kind of dirty, I don't necessarily want to say depression. I think that's the wrong word for this song. It's a heavy grit that self-destructive, I think, is a good term for it. It reminds me of chord progressions that we found in Nine Inch Nails' Downward Spiral, but also, well, we'll get to that. The textures also kind of fit here, especially on the back half. But it's more about that destructive depression. This isn't a song that makes me feel sad. This is a song that makes me feel hopeless. That might be a really good word for it. And that hopelessness is consistent from start to finish, regardless of how big the guitars are, regardless of if the vocalist is singing lightly or shouting. That hopelessness is built into every moment of this song. And if you want to create a hopeless sound, you have to use a specific set of chord intervals. And that's just, like I said, super consistent across the entirety of this track. Now, beyond that, there's not a lot of riffs going on. The bass occasionally has some slightly more moving parts, but more frequently than not, they're playing some sort of rhythm and note movement that relates to what the guitars are doing. And the guitars are very frequently just playing chords. There are two interesting things I want to pick out, put a spotlight on here, which is first, the chord progression is not symmetrical. It isn't, 4 beats, 4 beats, 4 beats, 4 beats. Here, we have a 4 bar phrase here, 4 chords, 1 chord per bar. That's not how this works. There's varying lengths to them. Now, the lengths are consistent across most of the track. If the third chord takes up 7 beats in the beginning of the song, it's going to take up 7 beats at the end of the song, too. But I do think it's interesting that there is an awkward weightiness to it where we're using an odd number of beats per some of the chords in order to create odd transition points of moving from one chord to another. And it also makes the final chord always feel super late, as if we're holding on to that third one just a hair bit too long. And this happens in both the 4 and the 8 chord progression. I thought this was interesting because it creates something that feels like it's constantly evolving. Even though once you pick up on the pattern, you realize how static it is, but it isn't just, every chord has the same amount of weight. The third chord in a progression tends to be the most tense, and I feel like that's pretty accurate here too, and they just really lean into it. There's a darkness that they want to highlight on that specific chord, but it's not like we move to a resolution of any sense. There is a little bit of relief, a little bit of tension removed, but it is not like we've hit a full resolution and have hit a rather consonant chord either. This whole song is tense constantly, and they really make you linger in the most tense moments of it. So I thought that was a very cool idea there. The other thing is that one guitarist, noise, being introduced into the song. We kick the track off with this high-pitched whining, which honestly I was a little worried about being more present since we're kicking it off this way. It kind of backs off a little bit, but that guitarist continues to play around with creating noise through their guitar, which I think there's 3 guitarists and a bassist in here. Am I accurate in that? We have the 2 guitarists that I definitely see with their guitar. I think there was only one shot that I saw the lead vocalist also playing guitar, and I might have just gotten that confused with something else, so I might be wrong here. But regardless, we have this atmosphere crafted from the chord guitars. The bass helps fuel that as well, bringing in the lower end part and really supporting those chords. The other guitarist is pure texture and atmosphere. It's grittying things up. It's making it difficult to listen to. It's adding the little bits of grime and detail to the overall atmosphere that the white noise of the compression on the distorted guitars can't necessarily showcase. It's that extra level of detail that really makes this feel grimy. It really makes it feel gritty and dark and dreary and like a place that nobody would really want to spend time within. I think that's what makes it even more hopeless. Because, we've listened to songs about depression in the past, and there's usually, yeah, sometimes they go into a realm of creating a sound that just isn't fun to be within, but there's also other songs that we've listened to where there's sort of a dark beauty to the melancholic sounds. This is not that at all. They're specifically crafting a sound that I think is abrasive to most people. It's a signifying point that this sort of emotion contained here isn't one to be romanticized. It isn't one to be sought after. This is real, true darkness. And I like that from an artistic perspective. I was not a huge fan of being in every moment of this song. And we'll get to the ending in a second, but the ending both really worked for me and didn't in like the best artistic sense possible. But I think a lot of it comes down to the general sounds being presented, mostly from the the pedal board guitarist, and them just constantly putting in these really gnarly sounds against the rest of the music, which is already fairly dreary on its own. Now we spend 4 minutes in this sort of lower energy bit. The vocalist is just kind of singing very loosely. It's kind of quiet. It's almost a bit of a slurriness between syllables. In fact, I couldn't even tell you any word he was saying at the beginning of the song. A lot of it just kind of feels like muttering under his breath. Not a lot of articulation to specific syllables. It all just kind of slurs together a little bit. It has this feeling of not having the energy or willpower in order to do this. And it actually sells the concept of this person being in this deep, actual depression. Musically, it's all really low energy too. There are a couple build-ups, some more natural, where we have this linear movement towards rising or escalating energy. Other times, I think it was like 2 minutes into the track or so, a single chord hits this really big moment, lots of volume, and then dissipates as they continue on. Like I mentioned, after we had, I guess it was 2 bars. After that, I expected, are they going to do it again? Are we going to have this idea where we continue to punctuate the beginning of every other bar? They didn't go that way. They kept the energy down. This was a momentary peak. Lots of ideas here that point to something larger and louder than anything else, but they really take their time to deliver that. It wasn't until about 4 minutes into the track when we hit a very loud, large moment. The vocalist comes through with that compressed clean. It's a very powerful moment. All of the instruments pretty much focused on one single idea, one single weight. It's very wall of sound, atmospheric, texture stuff, not really any riffage to look at. All you can do is feel the anger and the pain of this song being pushed into your ears. This rides us out to the end of the track, but it doesn't just stay static either. What I felt was the largest, loudest moment of the song wasn't it yet. Around 6.5 minutes, 7 minutes into the song, somehow they continue to find more room as they grow even larger and louder. The guitar's tremolo picking now creating this static wall of noise. You can't even hear the picking through all of the production and the choices that go into the guitar tone. It's just the tone itself with the compression and the distortion and the clipping and the white noise and all of it. The vocalist is just screaming. The drummer is beating the crap out of this drum kit. And it just gets louder and louder. It becomes so overbearing. And all I could remember at this point was, hadn't we already reached the volume peak? I remember looking at the volume meter over there, and it was maxed out. How did this get worse? How did this get larger? How did this sound become more overbearing, more of a weight on my shoulders? I don't know what the song is about lyrically, but musically it continues to tell me that it's about a place, it's about a feeling, it's about a mental state that isn't fun. It's about pain, it's about anguish, and I really like this ending. This feeling of thinking you've already reached the peak emotion, the peak negativity, the peak pain, only to realize that things can get worse. And for a song that I describe as hopeless, to be hit with this realization that not only are things not getting better, but there's actually room for things to feel heavy or to feel bleaker only drives home this idea of hopelessness even more. That was just, like I said, there's a lot of noise going on there. There's a lot of volume. There's a feeling of, I don't know, a heavy, intense weight that I was not expecting. Not necessarily a sound I would want to return to, but from an artistic perspective, looking at this narrative of the music, absolutely stunning finale. Really blown away by that. There's a couple of technical things I just kind of want to bring up real quick. This isn't really a super technical song, but I love the vocalist's ability to keep this clean compression sound going. Obviously, I'm going to say that it's a safe vocal technique. I'm going to assume that he performs it this way live while touring. So I think it sounds incredibly pained, though. It absolutely sells this concept of a person who is not in a good place in a way that I don't necessarily always hear vocalists be able to capture. It feels very raw in a way that usually is attributed to not necessarily, I mean, poor technique would probably cover it too, but more of a destructive style, something that you would hear in like depressive black metal or something. Just on the surface, it doesn't feel like a sustainable vocal technique. It feels too human, too raw, too heightened for that. So, yeah, I don't know how he landed on this technique. I hope it's a healthy technique, but it works so well within this. And I love how he went from sort of the slurry, mumbly, kind of low energy stuff in the beginning to this very present, focused, articulate screaming at the end. I still can't hear what he's saying, but it isn't because of articulation anymore. It's because of the delivery itself, the sounds, the compression, all of that, and sort of being buried by the music. I'm sure there's some thematic thing you could pull from that too, about your woes and issues beginning to overpower your ability to speak, and you being drowned in all of the things that are weighing you down. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a strong read too. But the other thing that I wanted to focus on is the drummer. A lot of the drumming in here is very straightforward, sit in the pocket, lean into that backbeat, and just be a really good metronome. But I loved in the final 2 minutes or so, we hit this sort of I don't know. I tried to count it out and see what it was. Parts of it remind me of a hemiola, which is a 3/2 polyrhythm, but there's always like an extended element to it where we start off with like the ride cymbal and the snare together, and then we sort of start the hemiola, but we don't ever resolve it back where they hit together again. We kind of keep this offset syncopation for an extended period of time before lining things back up. So it's not a true hemiola, and I'd be interested to see if anyone else wanted to sort of map out that polyrhythm between the ride and the snare in the final 2 minutes or so of the song. There also seemed to be a variation of pattern to it, where sometimes the altering between the two parts of the drum kit would last for like 2.5 beats. Sometimes it would last for like 3.5 beats. I just could never really pick up a pattern of what was going on there. And there were so many other things going on. I was being overwhelmed by the emotion. So maybe it's actually a really simple idea and I was just too overwhelmed at the time to pick up on it. But if anyone caught any of that and want to explain their take on that drum part, please let me know. Put that down in the comments. It sounded simple. I mean, it is a simple idea. It's just back and forth on the ride and the snare in various patterns. But I feel like that coming from such a simple, just like tss, tss, ka, tss, 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 ka, just like a really simple pattern. It was just it feels explosive. They took something simple and laid back in a sense, low energy, and expanded it not just in energy, which would have been a really easy decision, just play the same thing but louder, which is kind of what the guitars were doing already, but the drummer decided to change it up And I think that even the pattern they came up with, which still wasn't on like a super technical progressive side of like melodic drumming or anything like that, it's still a rather tame idea on the surface, ends up giving the final couple of moments a really strong bit of character from the rhythmic side of things, especially as the guitars had abandoned rhythm entirely, shifting over to tremolo picking. And so we kind of lost any sort of rhythmic pulse from the guitars at all. So it really was the drummer just saying, hey, I'm king of rhythm right now. No one else is playing anything rhythmic. I'm just going to spice this up a little bit. And it ends up working really well, at least to a point that it caught my attention. So I like that little adjustment there. Let me dive into some lyrics, and then we're going to wrap this one up. So I read this as a battle within oneself. The very first line introduces a bit of this already. It really put me into the mindset of this. It says there's a wickedness that's in my blood. So we're actually going to take this idea of being radiant. So we have this concept of light. I kind of want to turn wickedness into darkness just for thematic reasons and understand that he feels there's a dark side of himself. He says the precognition of what a terrible mess I will become. I really like that idea. To feel this darkness growing inside of you, realizing you won't be able to stop it, and that it's really going to mess your life up in the future. Your relationships, your job opportunities, your decision making in the future. You feel that you're changing and there's no way to stop it, and it's only going to be a disaster. And all you can do is be along for the ride. He says, but by design, I'm fated to rely on what I know, to define the endless line of what I don't. So he says that for me to know what I don't know, I have to know first what I do know. And he says it's kind of a bad thing. Because how do you know what you don't know? Sure, you can cross-reference it against what you do know, but if you don't know something exists, you don't know that you don't know it. You have unknowns of unknowns. He says, how could you take a radiant thing? Well, if you want to take a radiant thing, then come and get it. Tear out my eyes, render me blind. Deliverance lies in the absence of my mind. He says, I was once radiant. I still think of myself as a radiant being. I have light within me, but you want to snuff that out. The darkness within wants to remove that. He says, if you want to do that, you're going to have to tear out my eyes so that I can't see what I'm doing anymore. You're going to have to remove my mind, remove my ability to understand the actions I'm taking. You're going to have to take over my thought process. And there you'll find that's how that's how the darkness is going to take over. When I give it everything. What I think is interesting, I skipped over the first chorus. The idea of tearing out your eyes and, um, that the absence of my mind is where you're going to be able to take over. This is repeated twice at the end, but there's a variation of it at the beginning. Instead of saying, how could you take a radiant thing as we lead into this chorus, he says, I couldn't kill a radiant thing. I like this shift. It showcases a strong sense of identity and the sense of will. Remember, this is something I talked about in the song, was a feeling of hopelessness. And the energy at the beginning of the song was a loss of willpower, a loss of energy, a sort of dragging your feet. It's this low energy, just whatever happens, this place sucks, I can't leave though. It's this depression state of not really being able to find that momentum to do anything. He feels this darkness taking over, can't do anything about it, probably feels pretty helpless about that, pretty hopeless about it. He says, but of everything that's happening within me, this wickedness that's coursing through my veins, I couldn't kill the light within me. We go through the entirety of the song before seeing that he ends up, in a sense, giving his light to the darkness. He says, if you want to take a radiant thing, come and get it. And he basically, as far as I can tell, he's sort of been weathered out. His patience has been weathered. That's the phrase right there. He's tried to fight this darkness for so long, but he feels he can see the future. It's going to win. He says, just render me blind, remove myself from my mind, don't let me see or understand what I'm doing. At that point, you can have this vessel. Do what you want with it. Screw up our future together. But I can't kill this light within me. But I've been beaten down. You're good to do what you want. And that heavy feeling, I think, really encapsulates the end of the track. How I mentioned that it's helplessness amplified. You thought you had already reached the peak. Maybe things are going to back down. Maybe you feel like you have the strength. If this is the worst things can get, I can keep pushing forward. I can persevere through this. But for the final moments of the song to ramp up even above that, this is the phrase I was completely missing. When helplessness turns into giving up. And I really think that's what happens at the end of the song, is that this fight to stay good, to keep this darkness out of his heart, out of his mind, it's a fight he can't do anymore. He's run out of energy, run out of stamina, run out of willpower, and it takes over. Yeah, that's a heavy track right there. Lyrically and musically. But these are just my thoughts on obrother's absence. What are your thoughts? Did you enjoy it? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own interpretation of. Please put all of that and any other thoughts you have down into the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.